This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everybody. This is Brian Keith Noonan, and this is week one of the implementation at the speed of focus. I'll get that down by the time we finish here. Challenge, the Q4 One Thing Challenge, to keep it simple. And I'm here with Tiffany and Tim. Glad you guys could make it today. Give me some impressions on since the orientation last week and dipping into or dipping back into the first 4 chapters of the book. Some takeaways, some thoughts. We're going to have assignments at the end of this, so I've taken assignments from what we read up to today, and then it'll basically be you'll read 1 week and then implement while you read next week's chapters. You'll implement something from the previous week. So that's sort of how this will roll, if that makes sense. So impressions on anything. Did you read the stuff? Did everybody read it?
I read it.
Honestly? Tim?
Notes and everything.
I've read everything here about 5 times. The funny part for me is I'm remarking to my wife that I've read this before, but not this book in particular so much as every generation, we seem to have to rediscover the same thing over and over again.
That's a good point. And very, very few things are absolutely original. The reason I chose this book to base a foundation of coaching on is that, to me anyway, it was very simple and made a lot of sense, and sort of took whatever influences and wisdom and compacted it in a way that made sense to me and hopefully will make sense to you guys. So I'll take that as a no, or you did read it, Tim.
I did read it.
You did?
You want to talk about dominoes? I can talk about dominoes.
Okay. I know you can talk about it. I was just asking if you read it. So the reason I bring this up, guys, is it can seem like a challenge to add something new to your schedule, especially if you already feel very busy and overwhelmed. And trust me, this is the one thing that we're going to add that's going to enable us to subtract and cut out all the fat from your schedule, cut out the unnecessary things from your schedule, to a degree that you can focus on the most important things. So that's the whole point of this, and it will definitely help if you read the book and to do the assignments. So I can't tell you that it will work otherwise. I don't think it will. It's taken me a few times through the book, and I'm just getting good at parts of it and continually revisiting other parts that I need to focus on. It's one of those things that needs to become a habit. So without further ado, I'm going to just want to put you guys on the spot for a second. Good job. Going to go through these first 4 chapters, really the 4th one being the most important in many ways, as we're getting into the lies that are in between us and success or continued success, whatever the case may be. I think for everyone here and everybody in this group, we're talking about continued success, like expanding on our zone of genius, so to speak, and cutting out things that we're just decent at or even excellent at sometimes, which can be a hard choice, but trading out so that we're focusing on the most important things for us. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with the book on it, and we'll go through the chapters. And I'd like to keep this conversational, so jump in and comment if you like. The comment has already been made, by the way, that my book looks like a coloring book. Okay, somebody made that comment before, and it's because my system of highlighting. I sometimes change it around a little bit, but there's a lot of highlights. I'm not going to sit here and read the book to you, but I may read some of my highlights verbatim. You'll notice in the book there's places where, especially if you're reading on Kindle, you'll see where other people have highlighted. That's generally a clue that there might be something important there. But I'm especially cognizant of where the author has underlined something and where the author has included a diagram, drawing or what have you, to emphasize a point. And so keep those things in mind as you go through the book. Also, at the end of each chapter, or just about every chapter, at least starting with 4, there's a summary of the big ideas. And if you were going to revisit this material in the future and you didn't have a whole lot of time, revisiting the big ideas would be a good way to go. Any questions or comments as we go forward? And hey, Jimmy.
Hey, how's it going?
Any questions or comments as you go forward, guys? We go forward, guys.
I don't have any questions.
Did I let you? Was there anything that you thought to implement from these first 4 chapters yet, or that made you second guess something you were doing before? Any other wins, challenges, or feedback from the first 4 chapters? Jimmy, since you're just joining us, you can chime in if you'd like, and then we're going to get into the material.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that kind of nailed me again was the whole idea of going small. You know, I think that's like chapter 1 even. And I, I've been struggling on getting my whole schedule really fleshed out. And when I was reading about going small, I really realized that if I just take and make getting that schedule done my one thing and get everything else off the table, I could probably do it. And sure as hell, I was able to get it done, by just,
Beautiful.
the distractions don't go away, but I had too many things going, and I don't want to say I was too big, but I just had too much going to get any one thing done. And once I said, okay, I'm going to go small, and the only thing I'm going to work on is getting that schedule fleshed out, and it just made life real easy.
Rock on. Beautiful. Yes. Practicing selective ignorance will become a thing for you as you go through this process, because we've got to let certain things go. We've got to not look at what the hurricane damage was in Florida because it wasn't us, and I'm just guilty of that. So that's why I bring that up. I wanted to get into news. I got sucked into the news today because I wanted to find out what happened with the hurricane. And then I end up watching Trump passing some new bill about for the music industry or something totally unrelated that when you get sidetracked, you get sidetracked. So selective ignorance, like if it's not affecting me, I don't care. And also saying no a lot. No becomes a very powerful word. As I've said before, say yes to one thing, we're saying no to other things by default. So we have to really choose what we say yes to. And even if it's a matter of, and you're feeling really overwhelmed and got so much going on, that you choose one thing that you are literally one thing that you must get accomplished in the course of a given week, say, for instance, then you're going to be more effective than if you're checking off the to-do list, running here and there, and just being busy. So keep that in mind. And
yeah, I mean, my time is pretty limited, and because it's limited, I really have to be more focused and more selective about doing one thing at a time, as opposed to having a couple things kind of dangling out there, because then I do a couple things half-assed and nothing really well.
Yeah. And there's a very high possibility, guys and gals, that you have things on your schedule that don't belong there. There are things that you're going to stop doing. And they may seem like important things, so you can evaluate, well, are they as important? I don't know why this is doing this today, but I think Tiffany's camera virus is spreading. They just might not fit, or they may need to be modified, maybe not done as often, or something like that. So step 1 is, once we get to that part of the book, but some of you or most of you have already been through that part of the book, is getting it all out on the calendar and saying, well, what time do I really have? What time could I have if I cut out A, B, and C that maybe aren't serving me that well, or maybe aren't serving other people that well, or whatever the case may be. So that's great stuff. And these, what we call quadrant 2 activities that are not important, not urgent, but important, like the planning that goes behind all this, the discovering what your purpose is, what's important to you in each major area of life, and making sure that you're focusing on one thing. You're distilling a to-do list. We're going to talk about this today, distilling a to-do list into the most important things, and ultimately one thing to be doing at a given time. So
I had feedback.
What?
I had feedback.
Oh, you have feedback? Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Let me speak. First, I tried to see if the kids would give up eating, and apparently they won't. So that was not I checked, and they're actually attached to the idea. But
Understandable.
along the lines of what Tim was saying, but sort of not, I'm not reading this book because I have gotten all the results that I want in my life, and therefore it's information that I've heard all this before. I've read the book multiple times before, but I am reading it with new eyes this time, and the recognition that I get to get over myself a little bit and like, oh yeah, I've heard this before. Clearly I haven't implemented it, because if I have, I wouldn't be reading it as my one thing that I'm necessarily doing, if that makes sense. So actually putting it into application and not just using it as a mental, like, oh, that makes sense, but actually applying what I read, and possibly changing up the things that I think are most important, even if it's different than, from my business mind and what I need to be. I think my one thing is different than I thought it was.
Very cool. Well, interested in those insights as we go along. And the challenge and the counterintuitive part of this is these aren't original concepts. Like we've all been around long enough to have heard some of this stuff, and some of it may have made sense to us. But then going from the knowledge and intellectual application to implementing it in our lives, that's where the rubber really meets the road. And
Brian, can I make a point?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Tiffany used the magic words that every parent should cringe at. I already know that. And this is, so anytime the kids say that, they say, oh, I know that. That tells me learning has stopped. And I tell them that out loud. Oh, learning has stopped. But I already know how to do that, not Scoutmaster. Then you hand them the rope and they're clueless. So yes, we all have known this before. I know this is dangerous, because that's when we know that learning has stopped. That's why Tiffany looking at this with new eyes is so cool. And I'm looking at Jim's stuff going small. Yep, I got to do that, because I'm all over the place and I'm in 15 different directions at once, and it's just not happy. So that's why getting down to one thing meant 5 hours yesterday working on paperwork for an Eagle Scout. So yeah, it's work. But the important part is if we get with the one thing, there's a thing called priming, Brian, that's not covered in this book, where Lord Stanley, when he was going through the Congo, would shave every morning. Even though half his men died, that man shaved every morning, because that was his one little grasp of normal. And otherwise, in a jungle hell. So that's part of the priming process. We need to we'll get there with habits. We're actually priming the pump and actually saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how I know this. So that's my part.
Good stuff, Tim. So there is hope, and we're not going to be piling new things upon new things on top of you. We're really going to be working to subtract from your busyness, subtract from your life the unnecessary things, so that you have a fighting chance of getting the most important things done. And although we'll be focusing in this group on more of the business and career, say business, career, finance pillar of life, these same principles apply to your personal health and well-being. It could be your fitness, could be just your spirituality, everything that goes into keeping you growing and expanding. It can be applied to the pillar of relationships, kids, spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, et cetera, et cetera. It can go into, and you'll categorize your life and organize it the way that you see fit. But I think in the book later on, he breaks it down into maybe 7 different parts. I think for me, it comes down to probably more like 4 or 5, including a personal rewards pillar. And as you see how these principles all map onto goals, purpose-driven priority, productivity, and profits for your business, and map onto your calendar, at a given time of day, you'll be able to ask yourself, what's the most important thing for me to do right now for my business? What's the most important thing for me to do right now for my health? And keeping those appointments with yourself, so you're covering all your bases in these major pillars of life. That's just a little bit of a preview, and I'm saying it mostly because I know that most of you have toyed around with this a little bit at least, and some dug into it more seriously. And it's one of those things that requires ongoing maintenance. So if you haven't done it in a while, it's worth doing again. I think revisiting goals quarterly makes a whole lot of sense. And that's how it's evolving for me now. Having a planning session each week to take a look at your week and sort of take your to-do list and distill it, which we'll be talking about today, also is essential and makes sense. And even on a daily basis, taking a look at that day, because conditions change as you go along, so as not to be completely reactive, but be proactive and say, okay, I think I need to adjust some of these things here going forward in my week or my day. The focusing question that you should all memorize is, what is the one thing that I can do so that everything else becomes easier or necessary? And it can be, what is the one thing for my business that I can do so that everything else becomes easier or necessary? What is the one thing for my health that I can do so that everything else becomes easier and necessary? So we're looking to cut out the less effective things and hit the most highest leverage things that, like the dominoes, as Tim mentioned, and that's a reoccurring theme in this book. You're setting them up in a way so that when you're knocking one down, you have bigger and bigger dominoes falling in a leveraged, geometric, momentum-based type of progression with what you're doing. So without further ado, for real, let's look at the book. Let's look at my coloring book. And guys, just feel free to jump in on stuff as we go. But I like the reference to Curly from City Slickers. You guys have probably seen that movie at some point. It's a funny movie. But he basically says the secret of life is one thing, and one thing that matters and everything else doesn't mean shit. Now, this has a lot of truth to it. Okay. And the more you see the possibility of accomplishing the one big thing, then I made this a little bigger so you could see it better. And cutting out the unnecessary things, the more you're going to have momentum, success, completion, and satisfaction out of getting things done, the important things done. So the author mentions that where he had huge success, he narrowed his concentration to one thing. Where his success varied, his focus had to. So the concept of going small to go big. And he had great success in his company when he was working with his managers and basically got down to one thing you can do this week, such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary. So not even 5 things, not even 10 things. So this is big. And when we talk about distilling our to-do lists and categorizing things and distilling them into the 20% that produces the 80% of our results, this will all become more clear. Going small is ignoring all the things you could do and doing what you should do. It's recognizing that not all things matter equally and finding the things that matter the most. Tighter way to connect what you do with what you want. And this whole exercise is about what you want, guys. Not what I think, not what we think of each other, what we think about each other's goals and things like that. Not what society thinks, not what your family thinks. It's got to be what is really most important to you, and you can generally satisfy those other people as you feel necessary as you go along the way. Okay, realizing that I can tell this full screen thing is going to get to me. Okay, so bear with me 1 second, because I'm trying to make this big enough for you guys to see, and I'm also skipping around. Doing fewer things for more effect instead of doing more things with side effects. Okay, this is actually good here. So this is where I was trying to be. I was reading this. Tighter way to connect what you do with what you want. It's realizing the extraordinary results are directly determined by how narrow you can make your focus. Okay, so most of us go out and try to think big, do a lot of different things, and the big success seems time consuming and complicated, and calendars become overloaded, to-do lists become overloaded, and things start feeling out of reach. And whether it's the first thing or the next level of things, they start feeling out of reach. And so our whole reason for being here is to make sure that your dreams don't die, and so that your lives don't get smaller than you want them to be. You need to be doing fewer things for more effect instead of doing more things with side effects. So adding more stuff in is not going to help. We need to go smaller to go big. We're all busy, and we need to cut things out. I don't know why my camera keeps doing this, but thoughts on that so far, guys?
Well, you would really, when you were coaching me a couple weeks ago, you were saying you got to get your calendar done. You got to get your calendar done, and I kept thinking, well, yeah, I'll get to my calendar, and I didn't, until I just decided that the activity of doing the calendar was directly related to my productivity, and my productivity is what's going to move me closer to my goal. So I needed to just cut the BS and sit down and do it. It wasn't fun. I didn't enjoy it. It took more time than I wanted it to take, but now I've got that whole skeleton, and it's just real easy putting the things in as they come along.
Brilliant.
It made a huge difference.
When we realized that having a structured calendar isn't giving us restrictions and limitations, and it's actually having the opposite effect, and it's giving us space and priority and productivity and accomplishment, and making sure that we're keeping our personal lives and our family lives and our health in order at the same time, because it's all in there. One of the exercises later on in the book is to start your calendar with putting in vacations and long weekends first. Your periods of rest, and then your family times and connection with your kids, your spouse, etc. All these things that are not work related, but are essential to having a fulfilling life for most people. So, and everybody needs rest. I mean, none of us are bionic, right? But I always thought that making calendars and lists and structuring myself was restrictive, but it's really not at all. Once you see the wisdom of time blocking and different things we'll do later in the book. All right, good stuff. So we're talking about the domino effect in chapter 2 here, and this is a geometric domino progression. Once again, where he puts diagrams in here, pay attention. Where he puts...
You're not sharing your screen if you think you are.
Oh. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So we're into chapter 2 here, and I was saying where he has diagrams, pay special attention. Especially pay attention where he underlines things, the author underlines things, pay special attention. And you can pay attention to my coloring book highlighting as well if you like. But his diagrams, underlining, and big ideas at the end of each chapter is really the meat of this stuff. So whether you've heard of this experiment or not, a domino will knock down a domino that's 50% larger than it. So if you line up dominoes in this way, you can come up with what's called a geometric progression of size. And I was going to blow this up, but from a 1-inch domino to number 18, or 2-inch domino to the 18th domino being the size of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the 23rd one being the size of the Eiffel Tower. And so it's almost mind-boggling, but if you make them 50% bigger, they will do this. Okay, so instead of a linear progression like dominoes knocking over other dominoes the same size. He's bringing in the idea that you can have a geometric progression if you're utilizing the leverage of having the right first domino that you knock down, or the most important thing in each day or each part of your day, each time block that you've allotted for different things, then everything else becomes easier or necessary. The dominoes are falling on their own and getting bigger, having bigger and bigger impact as they go along the way. Toppling dominoes is pretty straightforward. You line them up and tip over the first one. In the real world, though, it's a bit more complicated. The challenge is that life doesn't line up everything for us and say, here's where you should start. Highly successful people know this. So every day they line up their priorities anew, find the lead domino, and whack away at it until it falls. I don't know about you guys, but the temptation to either procrastinate on something that I know is important but isn't my favorite thing to do, like maybe making your calendar, Jimmy, for instance, or starting with something and not enjoying it, or feeling stuck with it and moving on to something else, or distracting myself by, say, wondering, wonder what my 5,000 friends on Facebook are doing today. That's deadly, guys. Skipping back and forth between things is going to be a killer, and sticking, even if it's your first thing that you're working on, and maybe even the last thing that you get done in one day, one effective thing is going to trump 10 or 20 ineffective things all day, every day. That makes sense?
Sure.
And the geometric part of it is that knocking things over in the right order, completing them in a meaningful sequence with the most highly leveraged things first, builds upon success after success. Instead of scattering yourself, instead of a shotgun approach, we're going laser approach. And a lot of people, when they start reading this book, start thinking, well, what do I have to do? Figure out my ultimate purpose in life. I'm here to create world peace or whatever, and that's the only thing I can work on. No, not necessarily. If you're lucky enough to have a vision like that and clarity like that, that's super. But if you don't, we're going to, this week, as far as our part of our implementation, we're going to come up with our one thing that is a working model of a one thing, and especially as related to business, career, and finance. So for me, I've determined that it's teaching, coaching, and mentoring. That's what I love to do. This shit lights me up. This is the job I like to do, what we're doing right now. And so the more I can have of that in my day, and the better I feel, and I feel the bigger impact I make on the world, even if it's a small group at a time or one person at a time. Also, the more I work during my day on the business that's intertwined with that enables you guys to be here, for me to be here, and for it to be a win-win for everybody. Those two things are my one thing. And in my time block, as you'll see later on, that's my 4-hour time block. That's like my half day of focused work on those two things. I either want to be sitting here having a conversation with you one-on-one or as a group, or I want to be having conversations with other people about being part of a one-on-one conversation or a group. Those are the two things that are my main focus. And this applies to the other areas of our lives as well. But when I'm outside of that time block, and sometimes it moves around a little bit, sometimes it gets divided up a little bit, but when I'm outside of that time block, then I give myself freedom to see my kids, play video games with them, to do some exercise, take a walk, to eat something, to take a shower, to all that good stuff. It's all on the calendar, okay? And I know it's all getting taken care of eventually throughout the course of the day, but I still have to go at the most important thing, overall important thing. So you may not know that, just keep in mind that as far as your one thing, it's probably going to be something more like that rather than save the world from the Martians. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes. Although you just gave away my one thing.
Aha!
It's those Martians.
You can have the
Those
same
Martians.
one thing as everybody, you know, as other people, the other Martian,
There's a lot of us worried about the Martians.
or world peace, or world hunger, or what have you. That may very well be, solving that may be somewhere in your ultimate goals. I don't know. I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but in terms of bringing it into your daily purpose, you're not going to do that every day per se as accomplish the whole thing. You're going to accomplish a part of it every day, and each of those successes builds on one another. So this was an interesting chapter for me to revisit as well, because in terms of you can see my screen now again, right?
Yep.
Yes.
So going down to one product, one service from the standpoint of a company, and seeing how the most successful companies have really focused on one thing that they've become masters at, and then they may expand their product line and so on and so forth. But really there's a core product or service for each big company that you can think of. And in terms of our own lives, we're going to give more time and attention and practice and invest in ourselves to learn from coaches, seminars, books, et cetera, things that we're interested in, things we're focusing on. So that's why it's really helpful to have one thing or a tightly knit group of things that are your one thing. And you might have ideas about that now. I hope you do, but sometimes we don't sit down to really clarify it. And so for me, for instance, I had a give or take 20-year career in marketing and advertising and owning my own agency. And I realized that even though it treated me well in a lot of ways, it wasn't my zone of genius, like teaching, coaching, and mentoring is. It was a zone of excellence, perhaps. And sometimes those choices between genius and excellence are the hardest ones to make. You've heard the expression, the greatest enemy of the best is the good. Okay, so something's working, it's working okay, it might not be the ultimate fulfillment, but we end up lowering our standards and accepting that as how it has to be. But this is your life, guys. You know, these goals and these success lists and these calendars and these methods are here to save your life, to keep it growing and expanding instead of letting it contract, to keep the dreams alive, to keep the passion alive and keep you lit up, and not only benefiting yourselves and your families, but the rest of the world as well. And we don't want to be the most men leading lives of quiet desperation, right? That was Thoreau, I believe. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation. We don't need to do that, and we shouldn't do that, because not only we're not serving ourselves, and we're not serving the people that we could help. And we have a lot of, in this group, heart-centered, caring, helping people, serving society, serving different niches of society. And whether your passion is children and parenting, or scouting, or recovery, the recovery community from grief and or drugs and alcohol, or wherever you're coming to this from, it's important. It's important for you guys to, the world needs you. That's what I'm trying to say. The world needs you guys, and don't shortchange the world, and don't shortchange yourself, because you should benefit from what you're doing as well, monetarily, and still have a life while you're doing it. Ideally, you're doing something that you love enough that it doesn't feel like work so much. Okay, so he's talking about how So he talks about some big companies and how they focus on one thing, one product or services. Then he talks about some people like Walt Disney, Sam Walton, Albert Einstein, how they focused on one thing. Okay. One passion, one skill, and how passion, like I said before, for something leads to disproportionate time practicing or working at it. That time spent eventually translates to skill, and the skill improves, results improve. Better results generally lead to more enjoyment and more passion, and more time is invested. It can be a virtuous cycle all the way to extraordinary results. I think I honestly, I find myself, if I'm doing something as my main thing that I'm not pumped up about, I really have a big struggle with that. And that leads to just, I think, people numbing things in different ways and really being, leading those lives of quiet desperation. So it's worth reevaluating from time to time and making sure that you're on track, and including the things that are important but not urgent in your life. The one thing shows up time and time again in the lives of the successful because it's a fundamental truth. The author says it showed up for me, and if you let it, it will show up for you. Applying the one thing to your work and in your life is the simplest and smartest thing you can do to propel yourself for the success you want. Talks about Bill Gates and how he did his thing, and refers back to the City Slickers movie again. We've talked about this being distracting times we live in, and how the world has opened up, and we're talking to people around the world. And this group here happens to be only people from the U.S. at the moment, but I routinely speak with people in all kinds of different parts of the world on a daily basis, and it's amazing. But it also can be overwhelming and can be very distracting to have all these different people spewing their lives or typically success reels onto places like Facebook, or all this different information coming from the media, which I highly suggest categorically ignoring, using that selective ignorance on. Different things like that. We really have to be careful because our time gets frittered away. Once a thing sits at the heart of success, is starting point for achieving extraordinary results. Based on research and real life experience, it's a big idea about success wrapped in a disarmingly simple package. Explaining it is easy, buying into it can be tough. So we're about to go into that next part, but this is another thing. We talk about this being counterintuitive, but some things just sound so freaking simple that you don't think they could work. and so you don't try them, right? And all I'm inviting you to do is, if what you have been doing hasn't been producing the exact result you want, maybe it's producing okay results, maybe it's even producing excellent results, but you see that there's something beyond that. Whatever the case may be for you, I would invite you to try some of these counterintuitive things, some of these simple things, but going small to go big, going slowing down to plan a little bit and be more strategic about our tasks and to-dos and activities, so that we're not wasting time with the unnecessary and inefficient ones. And being more strategic, it changes things. It really, really changes things. And counterintuitive things might be the most important, might be your one thing. Like for me, I need to meditate. Like sometimes before I get into the fray of the day, which luckily I'm in a situation where I can control that to a high degree, but not everybody is. And if I get distracted, it's because I choose to get distracted, not because necessarily things are coming to me from all angles. But nevertheless, if I don't start myself out there, that's my one thing I need to do first. And I read this book and some other books. I start my day off in a powerful, centered way so that I can make better decisions and I have a plan and I have a direction for my day. When I don't do that, I am very much as you guys might feel like the chicken with its head cut off sometimes, just running here, running there, trying to make things work, but not really, mostly spinning my wheels. So I'm not immune to this in any way, shape, or form. And even though meditating and reading this book may have nothing to do, say, with the success of my business or what have you, or nothing directly to do with it, it has a where I'm coming from in my stance throughout my day. It makes all the difference, and it can make the difference between me being very effective and the things I try to do working well throughout a day, or things being a total loss. Luckily, we can keep bringing. Go ahead, Jenny.
I was thinking, what you're saying is, when you're mindful and you're in the present through your meditation, that helps you to see that, who you are presently, not who you were. And when we get into that mindset of who we are now, our stories and things are about, who we were in the past. We can't build our life on our past, and we can't build our life on our future. We have to build our life on our present. And that mindfulness that you do first thing in the morning gets you centered and gets you in the moment. And even though it may not always feel like the production is there, it puts you in, because the outcomes are in the present. Outcomes aren't in the past or the future either. So it really gets you centered and gets you ready for what is to come. And that may be a lot of craziness still might come.
I love that you said that. And yes, life is still going to throw things at you, and situations and priorities will rearrange themselves to a certain degree throughout the course of the day. But if I've started from a centered place, I'm not saying everybody has to meditate. There's no meditation in this book. You don't have to meditate if you don't want. But for me, it's something that I found by putting the world on pause and getting my insides straight, starting out the day, will lead to everything working better. And luckily, even when it can start to derail a little bit, I can go back to my focusing question, depending on what time of day I'm in or what type of pressing needs there are in my life. What's the one thing I can do right now that I can do, such by doing it, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary. And if I have a to-do list of 20 things and I break it down to the 5 most important things, and then take that list of 5 and that, which is now a success list instead of a to-do list, and break that down to one thing to be doing right now and just do that thing, everything's going to get back on track. All right, back to the book. Tim's writing things in the chat. I will revisit those after the call and add them into the group if they make sense.
It goes along with the could versus a should. Beautiful. It's a use of language saying, hey, there's also the must there. So,
yes.
But that's not in the book, so I'm adding to it.
We talked about that in our original mastermind around this material, and I agree. There is what we're looking for are the musts, not the shoulds. I agree. So this is the first, gets into the first lie here. Buying into the one thing becomes difficult because we've unfortunately bought into too many others. And more often than not, those other things muddle our thinking, misguide our actions, and sidetrack our success. The real solutions we seek are almost always hiding in plain sight. So the lie that we're talking about is everything matters equally. Okay? Why does it say that here? Because they don't. Equality is a lie. Oh, I see. This is just a little bridge into the next chapter. So these are the 6 lies that's posited here. 6 lies between you and success that we're going to be going over. And the first one is everything matters equally. Okay. So this is chapter 4. So hopefully you got that. Here we go. So equality is a lie. And we've got a lot of things to get done. Complicating matters, the older we get, the more there's piled on that we simply believe must get done, right? Overbooked, overextended, overcommitted, in the weeds, overwhelming becomes our collective condition. And it forces us to be reactive, okay, instead of proactive. So that's where the slowing down to go fast is. Slow things down a little bit. And that's part of what meditation does, I guess, too. But slowing down to have a little planning time and to strategically go at things before you get buried in the tactics of making a post and sending an email and taking the kids here and feeding and all these things. So when everything feels urgent and important, everything seems equal. We become active and busy, but this doesn't actually move us any closer to success. Activity is often unrelated to productivity, and busyness rarely takes care of business. That is huge. That is such a huge point. Huge, huge, huge. I can't emphasize that enough. And it happens, right? I mean, it really happens in our days. And we're going to learn how to turn down the overwhelm and busyness and focus on doing less and achieving more. I love this concept, and even doing it a little bit you'll see results from this. So be thinking as you go forward, like, what can I cut out? What can I cut out or move around? Once you've got it on that calendar, roughed out on there, what can I cut out or move around that is not serving me or serving the people I care about as well as it could be? Because there's things in there. There's trimming the fat to be done. I guarantee it. Knocking out 100 tasks for whatever the reason is a poor substitute for doing even one task that's meaningful. Not everything matters equally, and success isn't a game won by whoever does the most. Yet that is exactly how most play it on a daily basis. Achievers always work from a clear sense of priority. And you guys have seen my iceberg in the group. We talked about it a little last week. But if 70% of the iceberg is underwater, what creates success and productivity and profits starts down with your purpose. And the priority is informed by the purpose. And then productivity is informed by the priority. Most to-do lists are actually just survival lists. Can anybody relate to that?
Sure.
You can't see me.
Hey, man.
Turn my damn. Yeah, I can relate to that. And so how do we get off that hamster wheel? This stuff is how we get off this hamster wheel. Did anybody want to say something about that? Thought I heard Tim.
There's a lot we can say about that, but I'm just not going to jump all over it for this one, because you got to actually just the to-do lists. The fun part is when you get handed lists from other people and they don't bother to prioritize it for you first. And that's where, that's where we make our money, is by rearranging the to-do list, turning it into a checklist, and then automating what we can, which is what my son is famous for, automating things.
Cool. Well, we'll get to a lot of good stuff like that later on.
Yep.
So instead of a to-do list, we're going to be talking about success lists in this book. And it's a list purposely created around extraordinary results. To-do lists tend to be too long. Success lists are short. One pulls you in all directions. The other aims you in a specific direction. One is a disorganized directory, and the other is an organized directive. If a list isn't built around success, then that's not where it takes you. If your to-do list contains everything, then it's probably taking you everywhere but where you really want to go. Okay. And we're going to talk about the Pareto principle in closing out, but this is very, very hugely important. And once again, I've heard of the Pareto principle. 20% of our effort produces 80% of our results. And the 80-20 principle is an amazing concept and really works. So it points us in a very clear direction. The majority of what you want will come from the minority of what you do. So to my mind, is why not cut out the majority of what I do, really? Why not just work less and just be more focused? Okay. Some think the ratio is even higher. It's more like 90-10 or something like that. And this is how we create, we distill or transform a to-do list into a success list. Now, I prefer the must-do rather than should-do, but however you want to think about it, because I think my to-do list is more like should-dos and must-dos mixed in instead of could-dos and should-dos. But if you're doing this on paper or you're using an app for it, like Todoist, okay, for each area of your life that's important, and we're going to focus, like I said, on business, career, and finance, if that's the way you want to mix it in for yourself. But this is not your personal growth to-do list. This is not your relationship to-do list and stuff like that. But take your to-do list and separate it into the categories that make sense to you. Okay, and that's going to be the assignment for this week. We're going to take our to-do list and break them down into the pillars of life that make the most sense to us. I will put a reference in the group underneath this call for the page that has those breakdowns of life, pillars of our life, or however you want to think of it, key areas of your life, et cetera, et cetera. So let's just say this is our business and career to-do list, and it's got, this case, 16 things on it or whatever. It doesn't fucking matter the number, but basically we're going to go through that and we're going to come up with the most important things out of that list. And then this is a better number ratio here. So let's say if it has 25 things on it, come out with the 5 most important, and then just ask yourself, what's the most important thing out of these 5 things? And that's your one thing to be doing right now. We're taking 20% using the Pareto principle, taking 20% of the big to-do list, creating a success list with 5 things on it, and creating and distilling it down to the one thing in that category of your life at that time of day that you're doing. Okay, taking 20% of the 20% of the 20%. This might have 100 things on it, but I would recommend if you have a long to-do list, or even if you don't, take it and put the categories in so that you know that, okay, I'm doing important things for my business and career and impact on the world and finances. I'm doing, then have a break down to another list. This is for my personal growth and well-being and health. Then another list. This is for my key relationships and my loved ones and people I care about and take care of, so forth. So that way, during different times of the day that you're dedicating to these things, you can do the same process, okay? And you'll come down to one most important thing. Questions on that? Is that coming across clearly?
Clearly.
So you're going to have overarching one things for each of your main pillars of life. Think of it as the legs that are holding up the stool that your life sits on, or the pillars that hold up the building that you're building. Okay, here are the big ideas at the end of the chapter. Always worth revisiting and focusing on as you go through these exercises, or if you need a refresher. It's reminding us of the geometric dominoes as usual. There's a little diagram we snuck in, but big ideas. Go small. Don't focus on being busy. Focus on being productive. Allow what matters to drive your day. Go extreme. Once you figure out what actually matters, keep asking what matters most until there's only one thing left. That's how those lists get distilled down to one thing. That core activity goes at the top of your success list. And then once you finish that, then you can go on to the next thing. If you don't finish it, keep working on it until it gets finished. Say no. Okay, number 3. Whether you say later or never, the point is to say not now to anything else you could do until your most important work is done. Are we all nice people here? Do we like to do favors for people? Do we like to say yes when people ask us for a favor or to help them with something or whatever? Yeah, we do. But guess what? It's killing us. It's killing our productivity. Really consider saying no to things that don't matter, or look at your calendar, and which you may not have laid out like this yet, but if you've been listening to me or working with me one-on-one outside of here, you know that there's a time in your day that you could probably fit that thing in. And it would be probably somewhere in either errands or stuff like that, or it could be in key relationships where you're doing something for someone, one of your loved ones, one of your kids, your spouse, whatever, that you could say, I can't do this now because I'm focused on what I'm doing, but I can do it later, or I can do it tomorrow, or what have you. Okay, this is huge. If you can't say no, forget it. You might as well just leave this course, because
well, it's related to setting good boundaries in general.
Yes, it's huge. It's huge, and we don't want to get caught in the people-pleasing mode, okay? We can still be nice and say, not right now, or that's not something I can do for you. Sorry.
All right,
Or
Brian.
we can build it into our calendar.
Yes, exactly.
That's the point that I want to make.
Okay, Tim's got something.
Because the calendar has now moved up in importance because now it's a shield. You see, now I can actually go and say, I can look at the calendar and say, no, I don't have room for you right now because I'm on this calendar. So your calendar, Jim, becomes your shield. There's a reason to have the schedule, is to have the boundary set and have the reason why you can say no.
Yeah.
Growing up, we had a rule with our son that if it wasn't on the calendar, it wasn't going to happen. So anytime you got when a third grader walks up to you with a birthday invitation, he's like, "This is important. I want it on the calendar," because he knew his entire life he's been told if it's not on the calendar, it's not going to happen.
Right.
And now I just got this epiphany again. Like, oh snap!
Yeah. If it's not on the calendar, and if it's not on the calendar, you can't protect it. And I literally have. I have time off, I have vacations, I have long weekends, and I have things like 2 hours on Saturday and Sunday mornings. I have permission to fuck off on my calendar. Like, permission to do nothing. Not being productive. I'm not even doing my personal growth stuff if I don't want, and my meditation and whatnot. I can just watch Netflix or something if I want to, or I could sleep in or whatever. But guess what? Unless it's really important, nothing's getting scheduled over my permission to fuck off time. And that's just an example, but those things should be on your calendar. The breaks you need in between calls or appointments, put them in there. Don't schedule over them. You have to ruthlessly protect the appointments you make with yourselves and with your families.
Yeah, I mean, this summer was the first summer in 5 years that we actually did what we wanted in the summer rather than what people wanted us to do, because we went and booked our calendar for our camping trips and our hiking trips before the summer started. So if somebody said, hey, there's a barbecue next Saturday, well, I'd love to be there, but I'm climbing Mount Washington. Have a nice day. Whereas every other summer, we would give up those hiking trips because they weren't on the calendar, and we would go to these barbecues, and then at the end of the summer, we were pissed because we didn't get enough hiking in.
There you go.
This summer it happened.
Perfect. And it's because you determined that was important to you and Trisha ahead of time, and either blocked it out on an actual calendar or mentally anyway, and were able to say no to something that was less important to you. So that's beautiful.
Huge.
Last thing on that list and the big ideas on chapter 4 is don't get trapped in the checkoff game. Okay. If we believe things don't matter equally, we must act accordingly. We can't fall prey to the notion that everything has to be done, that checking off things in our list is where our success is all about, okay? We can't be trapped in a game of checkoff that never produces a winner. The truth is that things don't matter equally, and success is found in doing what matters most. Sometimes it's the first thing you do. Sometimes it's the only thing you do. Regardless, doing the most important thing is always the most important thing. All right, guys, awesome. So for an assignment, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time here, this is what I would offer you as an assignment. One is taking your to-do list and first categorizing it in the main pillars of your life. So business and career, family, personal growth, health and well-being, however you want to do it. You might have 4, 5, 6, 7 categories. I don't care. Just parse it out like that, and then take each of those to-do lists and take the 20% that's the most important out and create a success list from that. And then from there, judging by what day or time of day that you're in, it'll be much easier to find the one most important thing, or at least one of the most highly leveraged things that you could be doing. Even being in the ballpark of the 20% will skyrocket your productivity and fulfillment and satisfaction. Trust me. Okay. And so that's assignment number 1. And you can do, I don't care if you do it on paper or an app. Nobody else is going to see it, but hopefully some of you will be open to discuss them. And I'll discuss more about mine as well next week. And then figure out, assignment number 2 is, what is your overarching one thing in life and business? Okay. It could be coaching, teaching, and mentoring. It could be writing. It could be public speaking. It could be anything that's important to you. Okay. I'm just getting ideas from who I know is in this group and who will be watching this, but ballpark what that one thing is and what you want to be doing more of and what you want to be getting paid more for and what you want to be having a higher impact in. And I'd like to have that discussion next week with you guys or within the group leading up to next week. So what's the one thing? What's the overarching one thing in that area of your life? And as a bonus, if you're in business, what's the one thing, the one product or service that your business specializes in, and what problem are you really solving? That's a good one for you entrepreneurs. Like, what problem are you really solving? So what's the one problem that you can solve in your business for someone? And it's not becoming a better XYZ. It's not like we're going to help you become a better XYZ. That's just more of a condition. You're improving a condition. I'm talking about what problem, serious problem that someone wants to pay you for, can you solve? Okay. Any quick questions on the assignment before we sign off? I know people have other appointments and stuff.
Good to go.
I'm good.
Okay. Awesome, guys. Great session. I will see you next week. Read the next 4 chapters. Okay.
Got it.
All right. Cheers, guys. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.